309 BC, 3586 AM. Agathocles of Greek Syracuse attacked Carthage, forcing the Carthaginians to flee and take refuge in the city. They sacrificed 500 children to Baal Hamon for their deliverance. Syracuse was founded by people descended from Israel from those Danaan migrations 1056 years earlier in 1365 BC. This was the 4000th year of the Phoenix chronology. The Carthaginian population, too Semitic, was also an admixture of Syrians, Phoenicians and Hebrews. This was 276 years, 138 times 2, after the fall of Judah in 585 BC, many Jews being in both Carthage and in Syracuse, 1 Phoenicians. 307 BC, 3588 AM. In this year, Ashoka of India was imbued with a missionary spirit and sent out about 80,000 Buddhist missionaries throughout India, Persia, Babylonia, Palestine, Egypt, Syria, Ceylon, and as far as China and Japan. This was the 236th year of the Buddhist calendar. In this year, planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit. 1. Aryan Sun Myths. 305 BC, 3590 AM. Ptolemy declares himself king of Egypt in the 14th year of his rule as satrap, formerly a Macedonian general of Alexander the Great. 303 BC, 3592 AM. The Ptolemaic dynasty was founded in Egypt, a Macedonian dynasty. This is 1104 years, 552 plus 552, after Israel became a nation in 1407 BC. And 700 years after the Davidic dynasty was founded in 1003 BC at Jerusalem. This was 504 years, 252 plus 252, after the founding of Macedon in 807 BC. In Rome, Cnaeus Flavius published a calendar of court days, allowing the common people the ability to understand the working of civil procedure, infuriating the workers and legal men of the courts, who previously controlled and censored this information, prompting them to invent a plethora of complex legal formulas, causing the people to rely on the court officials even more. This deceptive control of public lawsuits has grown into our modern judicial system today. This was the 450th year of Rome, 5400 months, or 9 jubilees of 50 years each. 301 BC, 3596 AM. Demetrius is called Poliorcetes, besieger of cities of Macedonia, and besieged Rhodes with massive bronze siege towers, but failed. Demetrius had constructed a gigantic moving frame, called the City Taker, that was 130 feet high with 16 heavy catapults, all of bronze, called the Leontophorus, a massive warship that also carried 1,200 marines, and propelled by 1,600 oarsmen. His siege failed. He departed and left the gigantic siege works behind. The people of Rhodes gathered all the bronze and recast it into a gigantic statue. The statue cost them 300 talents and took 12 years to finish, called the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. It would be felled 66 years, 792 months later, in a quake in 235 BC. This was 660 years after the Israelites finished the temple in Jerusalem in 961 BC. It was 444 years after the 10 tribes were deported by Assyria in 745 BC, and 420 years after the remaining Israelites were deported by Assyria in 721 BC. This was an approximate date for Euhemerus, who wrote Sacred History, wherein he revealed that the gods of old were really just famous people, men, and he documented the family of Zeus and the world back to Uranus. He claimed that his source material was from a golden pillar in a temple in the Indian Ocean on an island, c. 498 BC. The ancients were fond of referring to pyramids as pillars, c. 2815 BC. 1. The lost treasure of King Juba. 2. The poisoned king. Pliny, Natural History, Mining and Minerals. 298 BC, 3597 AM. Exactly 108 years after the Romans made war against the Etruscan city of Veii in 406 BC, again the Romans have a territorial dispute with the Etruscans and engage them in war. The Romans are led by Barbatus and are victorious. Until this time, the main body of Etruscan culture had remained independent of the Romans. But this date begins the total assimilation of the Semitic Etruscans into the Latin and Roman peoples. Also in this year, the Celts under their leader Cymbals invaded Macedonia but were driven back. 1. The Philosopher and the Druid. 295 BC, 3600 AM. The Romans defeat the Samnites at Centium. This was 26 years after the Samnites had defeated the Romans in 321 BC. The Samnites were Shemites. This year is connected to the Israelites in a number of ways. As descendants of the pre-flood Sethites, who built the Great Pyramid in 2815 BC, 1080 AM, this year was 2520 years, 360 times 7, since the Anno Pyramid chronology began, with the completion of the Giza monument. This was 1152 years after the Exodus, 1447 BC, or 144 times 8 years, and 1260 years, half of 2520, after 1555 BC, when Italy was invaded pre-Roman war, and the Chittim pre-Romans invaded Egypt and were defeated by Israelites. This was 960 years after the Israelite Danaan dynasty was founded at Mycenae in 1255 BC, and 666 years after the temple was completed in Jerusalem in 961 BC. Lastly, this was the 450th year, 950-year jubilees, since the Israelites were deported into Assyria in 745 BC. Interestingly, this is 2400 years, 600 times 4, before the Great War of Armageddon in 2106 AD. 1. The decline of the West.